Have you ever looked at an NPC in Skyblock and thought, wow, what an absolutely useless NPC. Why do you even exist? No? Well, me neither. But in this video, we're going to have a look at all of the NPCs, and we're going to figure out which of those NPCs are kind of like that. And we're also going to figure out which of those NPCs are the best, which are the ones that are most important, the ones that make the biggest impact on the game. This video actually took me a surprising amount of time to make, so if you enjoy it, please consider subscribing. And I know it's annoying to hear because literally every YouTuber does it now, but only 10% of my viewers are subscribed. So if you're the guy that watches all my videos but hasn't subscribed yet, maybe it's time. Just a suggestion, you don't have to, but you know, if you want to, it's there. Anyway, I hope you enjoy the rest of the video. We're starting off this tier list with a bang with the Auction Master. Now, I don't think I even need to explain myself here. This guy is S tier. He's the reason my channel is where it's at now, and he is a major mechanic in the game. He keeps the economy alive. He is essential. 100% S tier. And then we have the Auction Agent, who is just a cheap ripoff of the Auction Master. Not as good, but kind of the same, so he's A tier. Next up is George. You can sell pets to him. Now, has anyone ever used George? Yeah, me neither. He's a complete ripoff and a waste of space. E tier. Next up is Carpenter. He would be F tier, but because I got a video and a level 50 skill out of him, you know, maybe he's about D tier. Mort, the owner of the catacombs, the guy who you talk to get into dungeons, is a pretty cool NPC, pretty nice concept, but I can't make videos out of dungeons, so he goes smack into C tier for me. I think Plumber Joe is the perfect example of a C tier NPC. He sells one item, that one item is pretty useful, he's not very special, he does his job well, so right into C tier. The Baker is a really nice NPC. He gives you cake, he gives you a talisman, he gives you extra base health, very nice, he's an entire event, B tier. Now we have this guy. I didn't even know his name until I had to make this video. Apparently he's called Marco, and he runs the painting thingo that is in the flower shop that you only ever go to for guild splashes. He's completely useless, he gives you a paint gun, he is E tier. Next up we have Sirius. This is a really good NPC. He's the owner of the Dark Auction, which is a massive mechanic in the game. This NPC is the only reason we have things like the Midas sword, the parrot pet, and a bunch of other really nice items. Oh, and like, yeah, Dirt to Midas, best series on my channel, yeah, this guy's S tier. Now we have Lucius, Sirius's less important brother. He tries to sell you an epic talisman for a ridiculous amount of money and does literally nothing else apart from push you to buy things from his brother. For that reason, Lucius is D tier. I'm gonna do Shifty and the Bartender at the same time because they're basically the same NPC. They both sell potion buffs, they're both pretty useful, they're both C tier. Now we have the race NPCs, Gustav, Goober, Guildford, and Gulliver. Racing is a decent enough mechanic, you get a talisman out of it, it's pretty fun. I hate to load up C tier this much so early, but I'm putting the first three in C tier, and I'm putting Gulliver in B tier just because the chicken race is pretty unique, and it's just not like all the other races. Alright, next up we have Jerry. Now, this one's going to be very controversial, and a lot of people are going to hate me for it. Maybe a lot of people are going to love me for it. We'll see how it goes. But I am going to say it right here, once and for all, that Jerry is not funny. And being funny is Jerry's only purpose, so if Jerry isn't funny, then Jerry is F tier. That's right, I said it, Jerry isn't funny. Get it trending on Twitter, hashtag Jerry is over party, and also follow me on Twitter, at NullzeeYT. Anyway, moving on. Next NPC is the Bazaar. Now, I'm sure a lot of people would put the Bazaar in S tier. I'm not going to, just because I think the Auction Master is in a tier of its own, in terms of the economy of Skyblock, but the Bazaar is pretty good. I'm going to put it in A tier. And if the Auction Agent is A tier, then the Bazaar Agent must be B tier. This next NPC represents all of the merchants, so the Mine Merchant, Farm Merchant, Librarian, Alchemist, all of those NPCs. And before the Bazaar update, these things were OP. They were an insane source of money early game, you could buy infinite items from them, but as soon as the Bazaar came out, they added a limit to how many items you could buy every day, and that completely killed them. But they still have their place in early game money making, and they're a nice place to sell items to. So I'm going to put them in a low A. They're not quite B, but they're not as good as some of the other A tier NPCs. Next up, we have Old Shaman Nico, who sells 2 items, True Essence and True Protection 1 books. And these items are kinda useful, and yeah, they have their applications, but he's in such an annoying spot hiding away in the Howling Caves that alone I think makes him D tier. Ooh, next up is Maddox the Slayer. Now, people are going to get mad at me, but I am putting him in C tier. His content really isn't that interesting. I've wasted way too much time on Zombie Slayer. And here's the thing, his business model makes no sense. You have to pay him money for the ability to go and kill a mob for him to get XP. But why am I paying him? He should be hiring me to go and kill a mob. It makes no sense that I would have to pay him money. Definite C tier for me. Now we have the Blacksmith, who manages all of the reforges. This is a huge mechanic in Skyblock, so I think it's only fair that he gets put into A tier. He adds a crazy amount of strength, crit damage, and all of that onto talismans, weapons, and armor. Definite A tier NPC. I would even go as far to say he is nearly S tier. Not quite, but he is very close. Next up, we have the Lonely Philosopher, who sells a single item, which is a scroll to teleport to the castle. The NPC only sells 1 item, and that item isn't very good, so he is E tier. Now we have Master Tactician Funk, who sells the Tactician Sword, and that big pile of wood that you add to a sword to give it extra strength that costs way too much money. His items he sells are decent. They're not terrible, but they're very specialized, and he's all the way over in the park, so I'm gonna have to put him in D tier. I mean, the Tactician Sword used to be good, but now the AOTD is under 3 mil, it is not even close to worth it anymore. Next up, we have Ryan the Campfire guy. He gives a legendary talisman, which is very nice, and he has a pretty interesting mechanic with a fire that deals true damage to the player, and he makes it into a challenge for the player and they can build up their talisman in incremental steps. It's a very nice mechanic. It's a very nice NPC. He's B tier. Oh, now we have Melody. Now, okay, Melody, she gives you an epic talisman and a fun little harp challenge. What could go wrong here? Well, let me tell you what could go wrong here. They could set up the challenge so that it is completely ping-based and literally impossible for Australians to complete. I mean, unless you use some exploit or middle clicking or script kiddie bot thing, it is a very difficult challenge for Australians, and unfairly so. As a proud Australian, I am very, very happy to put Melody in F tier, which is 100% deserved considering the pain that she put all of us through. On a more positive note, next up is Tear the Fairy. The Fairy Souls are a fun little mechanic that give you bits of extra health and strength and defense and things like that, and there's a bunch of them. It's like a little Easter egg hunt. I really like it. And getting all the Fairy Souls gives you a total of 500 extra health, 50 defense, 50 strength, and most importantly, 4% speed. Getting the Fairy Souls is essential for any early game player because of the insane stat boosts it gives, and because of that, I'm going to put Tear the Fairy in S tier. Next up, we have Zog, who sells pet items. You can buy a bunch of different XP boosts, damage boosts, things like that. Zog is definitely C tier. His items are useful, but they're really not that important. Now we have the Lift Operator, who in late game is completely useless, but in early game, an absolute lifesaver. I remember in early game, I went down into the Obsidian Sanctuary, got one shot constantly, and all I needed was 4 obsidian to make an enchanting table. And let me tell you, if I didn't have the Lift Operator, it wouldn't have been possible. The amount of times I died trying to get that obsidian is absurd. Lift Operator is A tier, a completely essential NPC for new players. Next up, we have Rusty, the guy that lets you put telekinesis on your items for 100 coins. This NPC is a simple idea, but so useful. I can't imagine what life would be like if I had to actually add telekinesis by hand. It would be a different world, that's for sure. I'm going to be putting Rusty in B tier just because of how nice of a quality of life feature it really is. Next up, we have Vanessa, who is a complete ripoff. 5,000 coins for 1 minute of rain. That's a really nice money sink, devs. Are you kidding me? No, Vanessa is E tier. 1 minute of rain is not worth 5,000 coins. Now we have Oringo, who sells pets, sometimes for like 1 hour every 5 or 6 days. Really doesn't have that good opening hours. But his pets are pretty good. Legendary tiger, other things like that. They're not bad. They're a bit overpriced, but he's okay. I'm going to put him at C tier because I've never personally bought a pet from him. Yeah, he's alright. Next up, we have the Mongerer, who sells a bunch of items at the Spooky Festival for candy. He sells talismans, he sells pets, some pretty nice items. I would say he is a high C, low B, but I am going to put him in C tier. He's the kind of NPC that once you've bought all of his items once, you're basically never going to need to talk to him again, so that's why I'm putting him in C tier. Next up, we have Walter. Yep, that's his name, Walter. He sells Super Boom in the coal mine, or gold mine, I don't know, one or the other. Now this would be an easy E tier because you can already buy Super Boom from the dungeon shop, so not sure why this guy exists, but he is called Walter, so I am going to move him up 1 tier to D. Now we have Dusk, who is the rune crafting NPC, doesn't actually do anything, so E tier. Rune crafting really isn't that cool. I mean, I think they just need some nicer runes, but yeah, as an NPC, very useless. Continuing on the streak of awful NPCs, we have the Wizard, the biggest tease NPC in the history of Skyblock. I am sorry, this content is not unlocked. Come back in a week. And he does that forever and ever and ever. We're literally never going to get the Wizard content because it's basically just a bait at this point. Wizard is the easiest F tier of my life until the devs actually decide to do something with this NPC. Next up, we have Guy, who lets you upgrade your personal bank at the cost of a ridiculous amount of emeralds and way too much money. The upgrades you buy from Guy are permanent to your player, so that's really good. It's not like just buying an item and that you're able to sell later. It actually is an upgrade for your character. So for that reason, I'm going to put him in B tier. And after Guy, it only makes sense to have the Banker up next. This is an absolutely essential NPC. If he didn't exist, the economy would be destroyed and the game would be 50 times more difficult. So for that reason, I have to put him in S tier. Next up is Melancholic Viking. This guy sells the Raider's Axe and those little potion buffs for experience potions that are very nice. He has a unique little quest to unlock him, and he sells some pretty good items. The Raider's Axe and that potion buff are all things that a player will buy at some point in their playthrough, and so for that reason, I'm going to be putting him in B tier. Next up, we have the Lapis Miner, and he might seem like a really insignificant NPC at first, but his quest where you can give him an iron pickaxe and you receive a compactor is an insane deal, right? 3 iron, 2 sticks, and you get a compactor worth like 5,000 coins is so good. And for an early game player, that is huge. So I'm going to put Lapis Miner in B also. Pearl Dealer is very much a C tier NPC. He sells stonks and Dragon Hunter books, both items which are pretty useful, but they're nothing crazy. He also sells obsidian for a rip-off price, and silent pearls which nobody uses, and also endstone. His items aren't great. He's just your average merchant who sells some okay items. He's C tier. Now we have Cat, who lets you upgrade your pets at the price of money and some items that relate to the pet. She's a really good NPC. You can just deposit a pet and it'll get upgraded, and then you can do it with a different pet. It's just a nice cycle that'll get your pets upgraded over time. It's a good mechanic. Cat is A tier. And now we have B. Now I'm going to put an end to this simp war of who is better, and let me tell you, B is a useless NPC. The B pet is garbage. Let me just say that. It was kind of hyped up before Dungeons came out, but B is just not a good pet, and the NPC therefore is not good either. B is D tier. Now we have Seymour, the guy who you can buy tuxes from, and let me just say, if you buy a tux from Seymour instead of the auction house, you are out of your mind. They are so much cheaper off the auction house. There is basically no reason for this NPC to exist now that there's this many tuxes in circulation. Just buy them from the auction house. Seymour is D tier. And finally, to finish off this tier list, we have Romero. Now, Romero's questline is actually really fun, and you get rewarded with a legendary talisman, which is very nice. It's a good mechanic, it's a fun questline, it shows you all the different parts of Skyblock. I would say Romero is A tier. So that is our finished tier list. Now, I'm sure there's going to be lots of disagreements because there always are with tier lists and people get very opinionated, so just go write your opinion in the comments section and bump up my channel engagement. Thank you very much. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.